Ever get that nagging feeling that maybe things aren't quite as random as they seem? That a series of small, irritating events might actually be connected?
Hmm.
Today, we're plunging into a world where one individual believes those connections are very real and, well, very deliberate.
We are. We're about to delve into the experiences of Michael Barden, who identifies himself as a targeted individual. Our focus will be on understanding his claims of systematic harassment and stalking, something he actually describes as gang stalking.
And the material we're working with for this deep dive is pretty compelling. We have audio excerpts from Michael Barden's own online recordings.
Mm-hmm.
He meticulously recounts a variety of incidents, often backing them up with video, all of which he interprets as, intentional acts of harassment carried out by organized groups.
Yeah, and for you, the listener, it's important to understand our aim here. We're not trying to, prove or disprove these claims.
Right.
Instead, we're undertaking a detailed exploration of the incidents and interpretations, just as Michael Barden presents them in his recordings. Think of it as a structured way to understand a really complex personal narrative and, well, how one individual makes sense of their experiences.
Okay, so let's unpack Michael Barden's perspective on what it actually means to be a targeted individual.
Hmm.
He outlines a pretty extensive list: being stalked, harassed, slandered, threatened.
Yeah, even claims of poisoning and theft, alongside property damage and what he calls false relationships, it really paints a picture of constant pressure.
Constant pressure, exactly.
Indeed. And from his point of view, this isn't just, bad luck or coincidence.
Yeah.
He describes it as a methodical process, complete with what he believes are established standard operating procedures, SOPs he calls them, that many individuals who identify as targeted experience, along with elements that seem specifically tailored, personalized to him. He emphasizes he's been researching this phenomenon extensively since May 2017.
And it's evident in his recordings, his goal is clearly to document these alleged tactics.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking for patterns, trying to construct a coherent understanding of what he believes he's going through.
Yeah.
And a significant portion of his documentation seems to center around incidents involving vehicles. That seems to be a recurring point of focus for him.
That's right. Let's maybe examine some of these vehicle-related incidents. One category he frequently discusses involves what he terms parking lot harassment.
Okay.
He mentions this consistent practice of parking really far away from building entrances, a habit he says is because of previous damage to his vehicles.
Right, so he's already on edge about his car.
Mm-hmm.
Then he describes a specific instance where he believes a woman intentionally backed into his truck and then just denied it.
Mm.
What stood out to him, he says, was the contrast between her reaction and what he would consider, a typical normal response in a similar situation.
Mm.
It's these perceived deviations from the norm that really raise his suspicions.
Exactly. And he then recounts a whole series of occurrences in a Home Depot parking lot. After parking way out in a less crowded area, he noticed a man in red shorts walking behind him, coming from kind of an unexpected direction,
Okay.
quickly followed by a red car pulling into the vicinity. Within his framework, these details become, well, potential indicators or part of a larger orchestrated sequence.
The Home Depot location seems to feature pretty prominently in Barden's narrative, doesn't it?
He does.
He describes an instance where a truck and trailer blocked the entrance in what he perceived as a suspiciously timed manner. Then there's that notable account of the orange scissor gates
Yeah.
being closed by Home Depot employees, effectively trapping him and his son inside.
And what's interesting to observe in his recounting of that is the shift in his emotional state. He mentions feeling intensely frustrated, angry at the time. Yeah, yet in his recordings, he's able to describe the events much more calmly now. He interprets the behavior of the workers just standing there, arms folded, not moving, when he took it upon himself to open the gate as deliberately obstructive and, well, unusual in an ordinary context.
The parking lot anecdotes just keep coming.
Mm-hmm.
He recalls seeing an individual in the back of the lot near his truck
Mm-hmm.
who appeared to be taking notes.
Right.
And then there's this woman he refers to as Miss Perpy from the Neighborhood Watch,
Mm-hmm.
whom he claims was observing him at Home Depot and then left exactly when he did, leading him to question the motivations behind her actions. Why was she there? Why leave then?
And another incident he highlights is of a man walking very, very slowly, directly in front of his vehicle, forcing him to stop.
Oh.
Barden's internal monologue, which he shares in the recording, reveals his strong belief that this was absolutely intentional. He even uses sarcasm to underscore the perceived lack of coincidence, like, this guy must be really smart if this wasn't on purpose. He also mentions a woman who had been parked near him way in the back of the lot suddenly being gone when he returned to his vehicle, further contributing to his sense of unusual activity surrounding him.
So, shifting from parking lots specifically, Barden also describes situations involving what he calls timed arrivals and departures, particularly at a shopping mall.
Yeah.
He recounts instances where people arrive and exhibit behavior he deems sort of out of the ordinary, like sticking their tongues out,
Yeah.
seemingly at the exact same time as he arrives or passes.
Little things like that. He also notes an interaction with a woman and her friend who were actually pointing at him in the mall parking lot.
Painting.
Yeah. And within his understanding of being a targeted individual, these seemingly minor interactions take on significance as potential acts of recognition or, signaling between people involved.
The Apple Store parking lot is another location he mentions specifically. He describes a man just sort of lingering in the lot who opened his car door at the exact same moment Barden exited his.
And the name of the car.
Oh yeah, the name of the car. Imagine that. Appears to hold particular meaning for him in this context. He even shares a separate instance of what he believes to be the same man watching him in the parking lot later.
These repeated encounters with the same individuals or similar patterns in different settings really reinforce his conviction that there's an organized aspect to these events.
Makes sense from his perspective.
He also describes a red car following him, pulling out directly in front of his vehicle, and the driver giving what he perceived as really pointed looks, further solidifying his suspicion of deliberate surveillance or harassment.
Okay, so next, let's move into what he characterizes as driving interference.
Mm.
He provides several examples here, starting with a truck pulling out slowly in front of him, an action he attributes to the driver having seen him and deliberately trying to impede him.
Yeah, this feeling of being deliberately slowed down or blocked while driving is a really recurring theme in his accounts.
Seems like it.
He describes frequent occurrences of blocking and slow driving, especially at intersections. He offers a specific instance of a car moving extremely slowly and then turning without using a turn signal.
Which drives anyone crazy, but...
Right. But he identifies that specifically as a standard operating procedure, which highlights his effort to identify these patterns within what might appear to others as just, bad or random driving.
A notable detail emerges with his description of a burgundy van parked at an unusual angle. He connects this to a perceived increase in the number of motorcycles passing him shortly after.
And he links that to a change in his ankle monitor that suddenly allowed him to wear motorcycle boots,
Oh.
suggesting to him a coordinated awareness of his personal circumstances, even down to his footwear allowance. He even interprets a police car parked directly in front of him at one point as being intentionally positioned there.
The repetition of similar vehicle types, colors, and maneuvers is a really striking element of his narrative.
It is. He recounts another instance of a car pulling out slowly, noting it was the same color, and parked at that same unusual angle as the van he mentioned earlier. He also describes an event at an air pump where a couple pulls up next to him, gets out, fusses around the pump, but doesn't actually add any air to their tires,
Weird.
and seems to stage this whole little scenario, again suggesting to him a deliberate performance meant for him to see.
And the red car pops up again in his account.
Yep.
Barden notes it consistently parked in the corner of various parking lots, with the occupant seemingly acting as a point man, who quickly departs when he is noticed. This idea of individuals fulfilling specific roles in these perceived scenarios is pretty central to his understanding of gang stalking.
He then recounts a more intense incident involving being suddenly blasted by the bright lights of a truck,
Bright lighted, yeah.
followed by the driver abruptly slamming on their brakes at a yellow light and then flashing strobe lights at him. Significantly, Barden suspects remote access to his phone camera during this encounter, indicating a belief in technological manipulation being part of this experience.
Wow, okay. His accounts of driving interference continue with the Jeep pulling out without signaling, forcing him to react quickly, immediately followed by a red car appearing at a roundabout.
It's just one thing after another.
Yeah, and he also raises concerns about potential vehicle sabotage. He mentions developing brake issues with his truck shortly after it was serviced, and finding a bent rim and experiencing shaking with his 4Runner right after getting new tires, suggesting maybe tampering.
The pattern of vehicles seemingly waiting for him at locations he frequents often being similar colors or visibly damaged, wrecked cars further reinforces his suspicion of a coordinated effort. He also describes instances of cars just sitting parked in parking lots with no apparent purpose, which he interprets as surveillance or staging.
It's not solely about vehicles, though. Barden also describes what he calls pedestrian interference.
Right.
He recounts an instance of children, he believes, using an ice cream truck as cover before crossing the street in a way that was timed perfectly to impede his progress. Again, pointing to the timing as evidence of intent.
Yeah, not just crossing, but crossing then. He also mentions people just walking slowly or at an angle directly in front of his car, forcing him to slow down or stop.
And this concept of signaling adds another layer to his narrative, right?
Definitely. He mentions specific things like burgundy clothing or seeing a lot of red and white cars as potentially serving as visual cues or signals within this system.
Okay.
He also interprets staged accidents, maybe minor fender benders nearby, as deliberate attempts to divert his attention. His concern about being set up for a DUI, given his cannabis use, underscores this perceived vulnerability he feels. He even notes license plates with repeating letters like BB as potentially holding significance.
So these seemingly ordinary, everyday occurrences, bad drivers, weird coincidences, people nearby, they take on a very different, sinister meaning when viewed through Barden's interpretive framework.
Exactly.
Moving beyond transportation, he also details his experiences in business and public places. He describes a loud popping sound occurring immediately upon entering a store with his daughter,
Yeah.
which he believes was intentionally done to startle her.
Wow. He uses the term street theater chaos to describe what he experiences when arriving at various public locations. He notes people positioning themselves nearby, seemingly close enough to overhear his conversations. This creates a sense of constant, subtle disruption and monitoring in his daily life.
A specific encounter he recounts is at the post office. He describes an unusual interaction with the manager, who he notes also manages another post office and apparently has a military background.
Okay.
He mentions the manager following him out of the building, and guess what? The presence of that now familiar red car in the parking lot again.
The red car again. He also shares a pretty concerning anecdote about a post office employee. Apparently, after Barden attempted to file a complaint about harassment, he was told this employee had suddenly been diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow. That certainly raises questions about how his efforts to address these issues were received and handled.
For sure. He further mentions an individual just standing at the corner of the building staring at him as he left the post office that day, reinforcing his feeling of being under constant observation.
The pedestrian interference he describes extends to these public spaces, too. Barden recounts instances of people walking directly towards his vehicle in a manner that forced him to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
He even mentions an encounter with individuals he identified as gang members or bikers, just staring at him in a grocery store. An interaction he found somewhat ironic, maybe darkly amusing, given his own background. He also notes people intentionally crossing his path, cutting him off in the grocery store aisles,
Right.
and a woman brushing her hair immediately after looking at him, an action he interprets as another form of signaling.
His experience at the Apple Store provides another example of what he perceives as deliberate manipulation. He recounts being told there'd be a long wait time,
Okay.
immediately followed by another employee telling a different customer a significantly shorter wait time, all while the first employee was apparently making eye contact with him. He interprets this as a calculated attempt to provoke him, to get a reaction.
Even his own residence, his home-related environment, isn't seen as a place of refuge.
No.
Barden describes incidents occurring around his house and his neighbors' properties, including people just sitting in cars for extended periods, often appearing to be using their cell phones, just watching.
And he also mentions frequent helicopter flybys directly over his home. These types of incidents contribute to a really pervasive sense of being under surveillance and a lack of personal privacy, extending the perceived harassment into his most personal space.
The digital world also plays a significant role in Barden's experiences, it seems. He describes computer and internet issues.
Yeah, tech stuff.
Specifically, his internet connection abruptly failing immediately after he clicked on a link sent by a show called The Non Sequitur Show, and at the same time his computer clock changing inexplicably.
He further notes his phone battery just plummeting from 50% charge down to 0 immediately after clicking that same link.
Wow.
He also mentions experiencing similar internet disruptions during a previous online show appearance, something called crowd source of truth, suggesting a pattern of what he believes to be technical interference specifically targeting him.
A particularly intriguing aspect of Barden's narrative involves Freemasonry and law enforcement.
Right, this comes up.
He recounts his visit to a local Masonic lodge and his impression of secrecy, of getting evasive, vague answers to his questions.
He shares a specific story about the worshipful master of that lodge being apparently a homicide detective who also works security on the side at a local entertainment venue, Main Event, he says. A combination he found noteworthy. He expresses a belief that Freemasonry, with its emphasis on ritual, secrecy, and maybe performance, is somehow connected to the phenomenon of gang stalking.
Throughout his recordings, Barden touches on the significant emotional and psychological impact these experiences have obviously had on him.
Understandably, he describes how his initial anger and, intense frustration have evolved over time into a more determined focus on documenting everything he experiences.
There's channeling it.
Yeah. He emphasizes the cumulative effect of these repeated incidents, the constant small hassles leading to feelings of time loss, increased stress, just being worn down. He also describes deliberate attempts by others to provoke a reaction from them.
Like the Apostore thing.
Exactly. And the experience of gaslighting, where people deny what he perceives as obvious actions or try to shift blame onto him.
In his efforts to understand all this, Barden offers various explanations and theories. He believes in the existence of organized groups and maybe even lists of targeted individuals, suggesting that some individuals participating in these actions, the lower level ones perhaps, may not be fully aware of the broader context or the ultimate intent.
He speculates about the potential involvement of Home Depot employees, possibly linked, he thinks, to federal funding for national security training, which he believes might contribute to the gaslighting he experiences there.
Interesting theory.
He also theorizes about a connection between Freemasonry and his experiences specifically in Arizona, drawing a kind of symbolic link to the state's Copper State nickname and Masonry.
Barden even suggests that what he calls gang stalking skits. These staged scenarios regularly occur at a particular intersection known for its high traffic and accident rate in his area.
Like it's a designated spot for it.
Yeah. He also proposes that law enforcement might be intentionally creating minor incidents in his vicinity, maybe traffic stops or something, just to justify their presence near him.
Furthermore, he speculates that federal funding intended for legitimate training exercises is actually being misused to conduct these real-life scenarios, targeting individuals like him without any public knowledge or oversight.
He draws a pretty concerning parallel, connecting the tactics he describes to those used by Hitler's Stasi police in East Germany.
Yeah, he goes there.
And argues that these actions represent a serious violation of his Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, essentially.
A particularly personal and impactful incident he describes is what he calls the Veloster incident.
Okay.
This involved his fake wife, as he terms her, taking his car, a Hyundai Veloster, incurring traffic violations, getting into a car accident, all while the car was still registered to him. So he kept receiving official notices and bills related to these events.
Well, that sounds messy.
Very. And he recounts later seeing a similar Veloster car being repossessed, which triggered a really strong emotional reaction in him and reinforced his suspicion that the timing of such events is often intentional, designed to provoke him, highlighting the deep personal impact of these alleged occurrences.
Finally, Barden discusses his efforts towards confrontation and awareness. He actually describes directly confronting individuals he believes are involved in his targeting.
Takes it head on sometimes.
Yeah, and his attempts to raise public awareness by mentioning interviews he claims to have conducted with former personnel from agencies like the CIA, FBI, and NSA, trying to add legitimacy.
He urges listeners, people watching his stuff, to conduct their own research into the phenomenon of targeted individuals and to look into his last name specifically, Barden.
B-A-R-D-E-N.
Right. He also mentions pursuing legal action against those he believes are responsible for the harassment he experiences, indicating a proactive approach to addressing his situation, not just documenting it.
So, in this deep dive, we've really explored the experiences of Michael Barden as he presents them in his audio recordings. We've covered a really wide array of incidents, haven't we?
We have, from encounters in parking lots, instances of driving interference, events in businesses around his home, even online, all interpreted through his understanding of being a targeted individual subjected to gang stalking.
And it's vital, as we said at the start, to reiterate that this exploration has remained strictly within the bounds of Michael Barden's perspective and the interpretations he offers in the source material we had.
Exactly. We have focused on understanding the specific incidents he documents and the framework he uses to make sense of them, not on validating or debunking them.
So that brings us to you, the listener. After hearing this account, this deep dive into one person's documented experiences and interpretations, what are your initial thoughts? What aspects of Michael Barton's narrative stand out to you?
Yeah, and maybe this raises a significant question for you to consider. What are the broader implications when an individual experiences and interprets everyday occurrences through this particular and really complex lens? We'd encourage you to engage in further independent research, critical thinking about the phenomenon as it's understood by those who identify as targeted individuals, and just the various ways individuals make sense of their experiences in the world around them.